Starting right now. Now we're real. Yeah. Don't apologize. I literally was just doing some welcoming things. So what I always like to do is make sure that I've reviewed what we did before, just because memories are short. All right, memories are short. So last week what we did is we jumped in and we talked about just a little bit of a history of Confucianism. We also talked about postmodernity, because this whole course is couched in the subtitle, Ancient Wisdom for Postmodern People. And do you remember what we talked about in regards to postmodernism or postmodernity or the postmodern person? What are some characteristics that we talked about, if you remember?
Isolation.
Isolation. That's actually why the Frozen movie came up, because of that interpretation of freedom. Absence of universal truth. That's a big one. There's nothing that holds us together. There's nothing that is. The isness of everything has been questioned.
Yep.
What else? This is not whiskey. This is tea, I promise. Yes, the individual versus the community. If this was a test, Jackie would be getting an A, and the rest of you would be in a bunch of hot water. That's awesome. Yeah, we talked about the movement. One of the big things that's really important is to understand the transition. Hi. So the transition of history from pre-modernity to modernity to, see, when I was in my classroom in Louisiana, I had everyone in a circle, and I would teach from the center, and it would disturb the students because I'd walk around like this the whole entire time for 53 minutes, staring at them. None of them could sleep unless they did, and I would wake them up with my little wand. But I had 3 blue squares in the middle of my circle, and I would stand on one, and it would be the pre-modern square, and then I would stand on the other one, it would be the modern square, and then I stand on the other one, it would be the postmodern square. And when we talk about this ancient wisdom that applies to us today, understanding those 3 eras of human history, because we haven't gotten to postmodernism just yet, but understanding the 3 eras of history sort of helps us to understand where we are now and the extent to which ancient texts can speak to us, and the way that we need to build off of ancient texts, because at some point they fall silent. Okay, but we did discuss that this alienation and isolation of the postmodern person, because there's no overarching narrative that's grounding everyone together apart from voluntarily assigning yourself to it. Does that make sense? Okay, there's nothing, because everything in existence has its existence questioned. Nothing is. Everything is up for debate in postmodernity. Okay, in modernity, we had, I'll do it over here. So if postmodernity is here, we're going to go back in time. Modernity, which the big shot for modernity is Rene Descartes and I think therefore I am, right? Where the community of humans becomes the replacement for God. This is where we start to get the whole movement towards enlightenment and the scientific revolution, and we don't need those mythologies anymore. Okay, it all starts back here in the 1600s, right? Before that, we had the pre-modern era. All right, this is probably where Confucius is, in the pre-modern era, where maybe your external realities are divinized. So the tree has, and I'm not against having an idea of trees having spirits, so I'm not degrading that concept, but the gods existed and they controlled you. When we go to modernity, we move into humans controlling humans and also defining who God is. You know, we get a little big for our britches. And postmodernity takes that one step further and says, none of it's real. It's all to be questioned, and I define myself, nothing else defines me. And so there's this interesting moment for the human person that is somehow interpreted as disjointed from its chronological timeline. Can Jay Mashburn actually define Jay Mashburn without recourse to parents or upbringing or children or partner or life experiences? Yeah, but there's this tendency in postmodernity to curl up in a tiny little ball and say, I'm going to go ahead and define myself by myself. Confucius has a lot to say to us, okay? And so we started last week with just sort of jumping into some of the history, like where did Confucianism come from? Well, it came from Confucius. Was that his name? No, it was Kung Fu Zu, right? It wasn't Confucius. That was the Latin interpretation of what was going on with his name. He didn't write anything down. He didn't want to start necessarily a big tradition that had any sort of religious particles or principles to it, but he did want to address the tumult that his home was experiencing. And so during the warring period of China, so think for the new people, think that Confucius is around during the same time as, like, what do we say, Socrates and the prophets of Israel. Like, that's Confucius is, you know, you talk about being around some people, right? He's in that whole intellectual cloud of witness that is actually on the earth, the ones that we refer to now as like the ancient scriptures, the, you know, voices of old, right? So he's writing during this time, and then there's a warring period, and he's trying to come up with a system that would address this warring period. Simultaneously, 4 other schools of thought in China are also trying to make their way to the surface. Confucius wins, beats out Lao Tzu. If you know what Taoism is, you know that Lao Tzu was a contemporary of Confucius, one of the schools of thought to address the warring and tumultuous period in China. And this is about 400 years before we even get to Christ. Okay, so he cultivates this system built from the ground up. There's not a lot of room for speculation in Confucianism. We talked about that. And we'll get into the more nitty-gritty of the actual rubric and structure of what Confucianism looks like as a tradition. But we did learn last week that Confucianism is a significant part of Chinese culture and life and experience. And so much so that they don't even necessarily, they wouldn't be able to say like, oh, well, that's part of your Confucius upbringing. It's so embedded and enmeshed into the culture and the life that it blends in, okay? China does not recognize Confucianism as a religion, okay, even though in the West we do, all right? And so it'll be interesting to kind of ask the question. We do the same thing when we study atheism. We ask the same question, is it a religion? And that all depends on if you participated last year with Spiritual University and What is Religion? Just kidding, I'm not gonna make you go take that class. But the question, it's a good question. What is religion, and does Confucianism fit into it? So that's a perpetual question that will reoccur as we go along. So is that a decent overview of what we kind of did last week? We didn't look at any of the Analects, which is the sacred text of, I like to call it sacred text, which is the text that's associated with Confucius. And it's not sacred actually, because it's not considered to be divinely inspired or written down by someone who is divinely inspired. Confucius didn't write anything. Okay, Confucius's second generation of students wrote stuff down. Okay, and so those are his sayings. Last week we did not look at the Analects. Last week we looked at a poem by Wendell Berry, and we looked at a quote from Dorothy Zuela, just sort of talking about postmodernity and what happens when we lose our humanity. Humaneness is a crucial ingredient to Confucianism. So that's why we sort of ended with that Wendell Berry poem. And for those of you who are new, I will get you the copies of the 2 quotations that we looked at during the first break. Okay, any questions? Any questions? Okay, great, comments are great. Okay, yeah. Oh, right, okay. Yeah. 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 Maoism. it's interesting because there is some argument that the way Confucius presents and thinks about things works well with what Karl Marx writes, which Karl Marx is influencing now. Yeah. So it's maybe it's in there, maybe it like merges it and consumes it into its. Yes, yes. And unity is an actual really big thing. And in fact, unity is so important to Confucians that if your partnership, your marriage is too fraught with tension and fighting, Confucians would say, oh, it is way better to go and get that divorce. Go do it so you can restore harmony in the community of that family. There's no sense of having disunity for the sake of something that's not working out anymore. So anyway, so what I want to do is, oh, and just for the new people, I do this thing, and the people who came last week understand it. I do this thing where I say, does that make sense? And I have a lot of experience teaching, and I can tell you that if you stare at me and just go, I'm gonna go, oh, okay, they understand. But if you're doing that because you're just a little bit nervous to ask a question or to maybe do, I can't help you if you don't speak up. So if I say, does that make sense? That's a legitimate question. It's not my version of So make sure you ask your questions, especially since I talk fast and sometimes I'll start riffing off of an idea, and if none of it makes sense, just go. And I'll stop and we'll work it out. But that way, because your questions will always help everyone else in the room. You know that, right? Your question is never just for you. Sometimes you ask a question that everyone else is thinking too, but they don't want to. So anyway, ask questions, and I'll always break to say, does that make sense? Or do you have any questions? And you don't have to wait for those moments. You can, as I said, raise your hand, and I will find a spot where I can stop without losing my train of thought, which can happen. But anyway, so we're good?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I believe Daniel has given me control of the Zoom. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to start with a quote that I stumbled across researching Luther. What? Reverend Larkin, you're crazy. I am. I live on the edge. I study a lot of Luther. Okay. I'll pass this out. Let me get my screen up so that we can see. Share. This is good. Let's make it big. We're gonna just talk about this before we jump into, there it is. I was like, did he get smaller? This is from Heiko Oberman's Martin Luther, Man Between God and Devil. I love the title. It is very invigorating, and it's an excellent book. I'm nearly finished with it, just about a chapter away. Luther is one of my dialogue partners for my PhD work, because the person I'm actually dialoguing with is implementing a lot of his concepts. So I always like to go back and make sure I'm understanding what's going on. Anyway, I thought this was really interesting because I feel like Oberman's quote here, that's the wrong one. I'm gonna get it on the right one. This one. Okay, so where the context of this quotation is coming from is a discussion about whether or not Luther had like a high view of the church. You know what I mean by high view of the church? No? They're shaking their heads no, Linda. She's shaking her head no. Okay, good, you're in good company. Okay, high view, low view. I have a low view of church, meaning that I tend to play down the higher religious aspects of church, even though I actually serve nativity in the way that nativity wants to be served. But if it were up to me, it would be no vestments, like just simple clean table. I'm not into iconography, all that stuff. A high view of the church is going to put a lot more of those big flashy flares of church, the stuff that makes you feel like church. I'm Presbyterian in nature, I get it. Don't judge me. But there is that idea of church as like the incense and the bright colors of the robes and the candles and the, Latin and the, so we have a low view, which is kind of stripped back. The church, we come to church on Sunday, but this isn't the only interpretation of church. Church is actually an invisible institution that actually exists outside of this. The priesthood of all believers. Then there's the higher church, which puts a little bit more oomph into the hierarchy of the deacons and the clergy and the priests and the bishops and the presiding bishops for us Episcopalians. And then there's a lot more to do around the table. The table, usually in high church situations, is called the altar. Okay, you will hear me refer to it, that's the table. Okay, just because that's my orientation, my low church orientation. Anyway, Luther got accused in the middle, during his reformational period, of not having a real significant view of the church, or the role of the church in his paradigm of justification by faith alone, right? He really emphasized the priesthood of all believers and really emphasized the invisible church, but simultaneously didn't necessarily clearly articulate that the church has a function and a role. It's not because he didn't have one. He actually had a very significant view of the church. He never really left the Catholic Church until the Catholic Church told him to go. Okay? He was very obedient in terms of his relationship with his authority, but he was also more obedient to the gospel proclamation. So when he starts to do this whole, by this time they're probably being called Lutherans, okay? The idea of what is the church for Luther, he never spent time writing on it because he just naturally would have assumed that it was important. When you assume, when something is important to you, you kind of maybe think it's important to everyone else, right? And you don't feel like you have to say it until someone calls you on it, and you're like, oh, no, I just assumed that was part of the equation. Do you know what I'm talking about? Right? If, for instance, I always make a point of saying LGBTQIA+. Okay. I could say in a dialogue with John, who I've kind of just started to become friends with John, I could say LGB, implying he could hear it as, well, what about trans people and queer in general and intersex, right? It could sound to him like I don't have a preference for those other people groups represented by those letters, but I was speaking shorthand because I would assume that you would know that I meant the whole entire spectrum, right? So same thing with the idea of Luther. He didn't bring it up in a concrete way because church was essential. You're going to go to church. He literally, in his pastoral letters, says to budding priests, when people don't show up for church, aren't you glad I don't do this? People don't show up for church, what you do is you drive on over and you go knock on their door and you say, hey, Jay, I want you guys at church. Luther had a high view of the church. Okay, this quote is coming from that discussion. Okay, this quote is coming from that discussion. So the quote reads, for enlightened Protestantism, that's us, okay, or Episcopalians, and anyone else not Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox, okay, that whole middle section is going to be that enlightened Protestantism, which has developed faith into a rational system and eliminated the devil from it. This belief is not alien, but alienating and peculiar. Luther, however, insists on this very alienation when faced with the menace of an intellectualization of faith. If the devil is to be withstood, intercession is indispensable. Loners, here's the point of the quote, loners are defenseless against his threat and subject to his tyranny. A good Christian is always an infant in his dependence on God and in the way he is bound up with Christ and his church. Okay, the reason why I brought that up, because I feel like it highlights where we are in postmodernity. Luther is not a modern, okay? Luther is not a modern. He's not. He's medieval, okay? He has some tendencies like proto-modern, but you don't get modernity until about the 1600s. after the Reformation, after Protestantism had kind of gotten its legs under it. But this quote really addresses those of us who have decided to strike out on our own. I don't need no church. I don't need no tradition. I don't need my family. I don't need whatever came before me. Okay? That's where we are in postmodernity. But it's dangerous. It's a dangerous position. When you get caught, and this is what I think highlights here, loners are defenseless against the devil's threat and subject to the devil's tyranny. Okay, I'm not saying the devil's real, but we can demythologize the devil and put it into our own context for postmodern reasons, right? We can say the loner is subject to their own internal narrative that renders them defenseless against noticing the fractures in our system and the systemic violence in our society. If we're going to do the postmodern thing, we need to turn the postmodern mirror on ourselves. And how do I know what I know? How do I know that's right? Okay. When I come here on Sunday, when I'm faced with my people and my people are faced with me, and I do the things and I tell the story, and the story is told multiple times in any service, I have another narrative that interrupts me, that intercepts me, that calls me outside of myself and says, I don't have to be real to be true. It's another way of looking at the world that asks me to question myself. I can turn that mirror on myself. I think that Luther is highlighting one of the problems that we need to keep in mind when we're looking at Confucius. Okay? Any questions about that? We're in a serious crisis in the church because everyone has decided to ditch it to go find it on their own. And I'm not sure I get it, and I understand that impulse because I'm tempted with that impulse. But yeah, actually, he's going to pop up into my sermon on Sunday. Okay, so John is talking about lions and lambs. Can you? Oh, Nitsky or Nietzsche? Nietzsche. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It's mid-1800s. The first one is camel. And this basically concerns young people. They're starting out in life, they're starting families, they're starting jobs. It's just centered on family, the job, and making a living. Then in midlife, they begin to realize there's other things around them, and they search for what their real meaning is. And then when they become older and they find that meaning, they become lambs. This is what we're finding even in the Course of Miracles, that philosophy. That is the range. You become lions and you're looking for something, then the Course of Miracles might mean something to you. And once you accept the Course of Miracles, you become a lamb. And this is what a lot of people, I think, where I know what you're talking about, but I'm on a different plane, I feel, from what you're talking about.
Okay. Well, we are all allowed to be on different planes, for sure. So whatever you find valuable in what I say, take it. And whatever else you don't, you can certainly ditch it. Certainly take what you need from this discussion. So any other comments or questions about that discussion of the quote from that idea of the loner can't go it alone because they're susceptible, they're susceptible to whatever it is we want to classify as the quote unquote devil today. Yeah, Sharon.
Not a basic question. What does this have to do with Confucius?
Well, the whole entire class is called Ancient Wisdom for Postmodern People. So if we don't keep dipping back into the idea of what it means to be postmodern, then we will read Confucius as if he can't address our problems. So I start off with always like a recourse back into talking about postmodernity so that you can ground yourself, so that when we jump back into Confucius, you can start to see how some of his principles, the architecture of his intellectual endeavors actually have something to say to us. Okay, so we're calling something that what it is, and then we're going to look at it and then see how Confucius can address it. Does that make sense? I'm about to jump into it right now. Yeah. I maybe I'm being misguided. Maybe it's, yeah. No, that's I always try to anchor the whole entire discussion in something relevant to us, what we're looking at. Otherwise, we will look at Confucius like as if he's under a microscope and just examine him, and we won't actually listen. And I want to get you always to a point where you'll listen. So let's talk about the man, the myth, and the legend. Anyone need a little break to go to the restroom? No? Okay, great. So Confucius, okay? Confucius himself is one of the 5 most influential people, okay? Before Socrates, Confucius's real knowledge is knowing the extent of your ignorance. Before Jesus, he gave us his own version of the golden rule: not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. Some things that you probably have located in Greek philosophy or in Jesus's own words were older than that. Okay, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is a quotation that is long in existence by the time it comes out of the Savior's mouth. Okay, he was born the 22nd year of the reign of the feudal state of Duke Hesiod of Lu, about 551 BCE, before the current era. We've ditched the after the death of Christ and the before Christ to BCE and then CE, current era. BCE, before the current era, CE, current era, okay? He was born Chifu, personal name, and his family name was Kyung, okay, or Kyung, referred to as Tung Tzu or Tung Fu Tzu, Master Kung. Okay, so you start to see where the Latinizations comes in from his own name. Okay, he did get renamed. They didn't take the time to learn how to say it in the vernacular of Chinese, but you can hear where Confucius comes from, Kung Fu Tzu. Okay, ancestors were most likely aristocracy that were reduced to poverty by the time he was born. His story, and I do actually have a video of like his little biography. His story is really influential to why he comes up with the system that he does. Okay, I'm not going to hold this. You're on microphone duty. Okay. All right. So dad died when he was 3, so he's raised princely by his mother. His mother homeschools him. Okay, and there were some other teachers that weave in and out as he's going through this process of being homeschooled. He was indefatigable as a student when he was a teenager, meaning he devoured everything you put in front of him. Have you ever had that sensation when you're learning about something? Yeah, it happened to me right before I went to seminary. And the reason why they sent me to seminary, no joke, is because I walked into my pastor's library in his office, and I just was taking books off the shelf, and I would come back a week later and I would put it back and I would grab the next one. I was just reading everything: church history, systematic theology, biblical commentaries, like they were like fiction literature, just going through them. Okay, so indefatigable, like nothing slowed him down. One of the stories about his mother is that she was a concubine of his father, and his father was really wealthy, but he dies and she gets nothing because most of the inheritance would have gone to the wife and her kids, right? So they're left kind of destitute. Confucius's mom takes on the sole responsibility of providing for him, okay? And this will become instrumental later when he sort of argues for a high view of women, okay? He does not look down on women, but that's the influence of his mother, okay? He's a teacher, a cultural transmitter, an interpreter of history, and a molder of events, okay? His life was plain and real. He didn't live it up in the high echelons of society. He lived on the base level. He lived with the people, okay? And this is why I said before to John that Confucius's work, the things that he said, the way that he saw the world could work well with Marx's own theories about history and work and people, because Confucius based everything on the ground. He was concerned about the people. That was his number one priority. Okay, he had an extraordinary belief in the capability of people. Not only did he care about them, but he literally thought people had the internal substance for great things, and not to be famous and rich and powerful and be a ruler, but to actually do something remarkable like change. Okay, what do we say about people and change? Here, I'll start. I'll set you up. Once a cheater, say it. Always a cheater. You lied to me, you're a liar. I'll never trust you again. We have kind of binaries. We see things very drastically. Confucius would tell us, absolutely not. People can change. They have the capability of self-transformation. Okay? And that kind of rocks some of our Western perspectives, specifically in a postmodern context where we can cancel people, okay, to use the vernacular of the kids these days, okay? Say something wrong, you're off the list, okay? But there's no tolerance for walking with someone through that journey, okay? Confucius would say, walk with them because they could change, okay? They can change. So he married a woman of similar background at 19 and was already known as a multi-talented scholar, master of the arts, and allowed him to initiate his brilliant teaching career. So by the time he's 19, he sort of gets established as a teacher in his realm, okay? So he's already kind of known. And he devoted his life to learning and teaching with the goal to transform and improve society. He's the first one kind of recorded historically to actually look at things this way, okay? And he started a humanities program, and he opened doors to education for all. Emphasis on the last part, okay? He literally believed that everyone should have access to education because education was the thing that caused transformation. Do you agree or disagree with that statement? Agree, why? Yeah. Yeah, it is. Do you remember the last time you were in a classroom setting, or you were in a situation where you were the student and there was a teacher? And you heard something from the teacher in a way that just made everything else in your brain like just go like dominoes, click, 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 click. You know that feeling where like all of a sudden that missing piece of information was handed to you and it just fit, it made the puzzle whole. And now all of a sudden you see, and teachers can see that face, by the way. There's a look that students get when all of a sudden everything just sort of falls into place and they're like, I never thought of it that way. And once you have that internal reorientation going on, your activity in the world is bound to be different, because unlike modernity would like to convince us, and maybe even post-modernity, we're whole creatures. We're spirit and material, and what's going on the inside starts to come through on the outside, right? And so when we start to think differently, we will probably act differently. Okay? We will probably act differently. Learning was character building for Confucius, not just acquisition of information. We tend to acquire information, get the A, get the degree, move on. Acquire information, get the A, get the degree, and move on, right? I mean, doesn't that sound like high school and college in a nutshell? Right? No, this was like, Confucius argued for life learning. Like you learned for your whole life. It was learning was never a means to an end. You didn't just get the grade. The hardest thing as a religion teacher with 17 and 18-year-olds is what? What do you imagine would be my hardest thing with 18 and 17-year-olds teaching religion? Well, no, you might be the perfect person to ask. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Did you feel forced to regurgitate the answers you heard? That is the most frustrating place to be in for any teacher, really. But for me, who's dealing with these abstract quantities of religion and theology and philosophy, none of it's material, I don't want you to repeat me. I want to know what you think. But kids are trained in our new systems of education. They're trained just to say the answer, get the A, say the answer, get the A, okay? And getting them to actually think and take that risk of like cultivating and developing new things is really, really difficult. And I would say it's difficult among adults too, especially if you've spent a long time in a very hierarchical system in learning, okay? Confucius argues that it is not a means to an end. You learn to learn, and you never get to the end of learning, right? Once a sage, always a sage. Confucius never would have called himself a sage. He was always in the process of becoming one, even until the moment that he died. Okay? Always learning. Don't be afraid not to know something. We have an allergic reaction to it. Okay? We don't. There's no way we can know everything. Okay? He taught through dialogues and conversations. He was good at posing provocative questions. This is what predates him prior to Socrates, because the Socratic method is actually the Confucian method, okay? He taught through conversation and dialogue and getting the person to ask questions not only of him, but of themselves when he would answer in what might sound like a cryptic way. We'll get to it later today. But those answers would cause the student to go, what? But once you're in that state of mind of what, that's golden. Because now your brain's going to process it. Now your brain's going to chew on it. So he used those tactics to teach, okay? He didn't fall prey to the temptation to become reclusive. He wanted to transform the world, society from within, okay? Sometimes when we get into studying these big names of the historical traditions, sometimes it's, and then they went up into the mountains, right? Or they pulled themselves far, far away, and they became reclusive, okay? Confucius kept his whole entire body and presence in and among the people, and not as someone who looked over them, but as someone who lived among them, okay? As someone who lived among them. He worked in the public sphere, he did politics, and when that went bad, he fled because he lost status with his superiors due to local turmoil and his allegiances, okay? So he has some quote unquote common sense. Okay. And at 67, he came home and taught to preserve classical traditions through writing and editing. So he built things that people would be able to benefit from later. And he was credited with writing the 5 classics, but his students put together the Analects, literally the conversations, and which is most associated with Confucius. That's this text, okay? These are the recorded dialogues and sayings of Confucius. He didn't write them down. He spent his time preserving stuff, not writing his own thoughts down, okay? We can see some overlap if you wanted to with Jesus. You know, there's no gospel of Jesus the Christ, right? According to Jesus the Christ. He never wrote one. Jesus didn't spend his time sitting around writing. He spent his time being with the people and healing them, okay? So he died in 479 before the current era at 73. He had about 3,000 followers reported at the time of his death. Okay, 3,000 people followed him in his school of thought and thought that this was the best way to live life. Okay, final words. No intelligent monarch arises. There is not one in the kingdom that will make master. My time has come to die. Okay, there's hopelessness kind of embedded in that quote, but there's also hopefulness in the sense that more time is to come. Okay, it's just the way he wanted to go. He dies at 73. Confucius's voice was both stronger and more poetic a few days before his death, possessed of yang and less yang and more yin. Sometimes my quotations from the books don't go all the way through. But do you know the distinction between yang and yin in Chinese culture? Specifically coming out of Taoism, this is where we get the yang and the yin yang. Okay, and so yeah, the circle, and yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, I'll draw it. Let me get my little thing. Okay. I haven't drawn a yin yang in a few years. Last time I drew one was on a big whiteboard, and coloring with whiteboard markers is really unsatisfying. That's satisfying. I'm all for flair. Okay. These two kind of working parts that work together. This one, they each have this. Imagine me skillfully coloring in this whole entire shape. And you go, ooh, look at that coloring. Oh. Now you know what I'm talking about. This is principally comes out of like Taoism. All right. But it works here. This is a whole. This is the dark side. This is the light side. Okay. There is lightness always in darkness, and there's darkness always in lightness. Let's take the law, for example. Okay. The law can be good, right? It can do good things, right? It can do these really wonderful things, keep order, make some structure. It's nice to have a stop sign here and there, right? Or not, depends on how angry you get. You don't know how to do stop signs necessarily. But when you take that good thing and you press into it far enough, it becomes bad. What do I mean? In relationship with the law, what does that look like? When does the law go bad? Headscarves in RN. Can you say more about that? In Iran, yeah. Okay, right. Okay, yeah, right? Like, anytime you take a law and you uphold it to the extent that someone else's life is in jeopardy. Anyone here familiar with Les Mis? Jean Valjean, right?
Yes.
Okay, you know Les Mis, Linda?
I do.
She turned her video off. That's why she's off the screen. Okay, so there's the criminal, and then there's the legal person, the police, who's just hunting down and cannot show mercy towards this former criminal turned pretty decent guy. Actually, he actually does reform himself, but he had broken the law at one point. So this authority, legal authority, is just on the hunt. Okay. The law can't have mercy. So when we uphold the law at the extent of human life, we fall into this pit. But there's that there's these things we classify as bad that actually, when turned in a certain way, present themselves as good. What would be an example of that? What's something that's bad? It could be something banal. Okay. Yeah. Yes. 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 If the rule is you can never lie, thanks, cunt. If you can never lie, if that's the rule, then you're going to end up not lying and getting someone in trouble. But if you can bend it, lying, it's something bad, but I can use it for good. Okay, so this system works, and it can work with anything that seems to be in, I don't want to say opposite, I want to say in paradoxical relationship. Strength, weak. Okay, masculine, feminine. All right, what's going on with Confucius at the end of his life is that he had transitioned more into this soft, weaker strength. Okay, he was embracing that, the feminine of the yin and the yang. Okay, but it's not devoid of its own strength, just as masculine or strength isn't devoid of weakness, right? When does masculinity become weak? Or if masculinity is associated with strength, when does that become weak? That could be. Yeah, that is a good one. That is a good one. Is there another way that masculinity can become its own weakness? Age. Overpowering. That's where I was headed. When it becomes this thing that it has to exist at the expense of others. There is the weakness. It's no longer a strength, right? It's no longer a strength. Anyway, Confucius does this transition at the end of his life. We all do this transition. All of us on this planet, walking, no matter where we are, we have life experiences that cause us to maybe get just a little bit softer, a little bit weaker, right? We make this transition too. Maybe not to the extent that Confucius did, but anyway. That's kind of like the background of Confucius, just sort of, again, I'm not a scholar on Confucius, so I'm not sitting here like regurgitating my own papers and hours of scholarly research. But that's sort of the kind of high notes of what's going on with the person that you hear in passing Confucius say. Okay? Confucius said a lot of things, but I'm not sure that all the stuff that shows up on Google as attributed to Confucius is actually Confucius. Any questions about Confucius that I can try to answer? Did it make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Linda. She's back.
I said yes.
Yes. She says yes. Let me give you, do you, hold on a second. Okay, I can run through Mencius real quick because Mencius is actually very important when it comes to Confucius and Confucianism. Do you have time to just sort of like briefly hit some highlights of Mencius? Yeah, okay. So Mencius comes after Confucius, but was never a student direct of Confucius. Okay, unlike the gospel names, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, supposedly those names are associated with people who walked with Jesus, right? Mencius never was with Confucius, okay? At the time Mencius was the Confucian intellectual. He was like the paradigmatic Confucian intellectual. Paul? Mencius? Fair. Though Jesus did supposedly show himself to Paul, but that is a good example. Yeah. Okay. So he was a rumored student of Confucius's grandson, 2 generations removed. Okay. He was a social critic. He was a moral philosopher and a political activist. Okay. He served state best as scholars. That the intellectuals serve the state best as scholars and not as functionaries. He served through teaching and ruling minority. Humane government is part of Mencius's paradigms, and the kingly way, or the Wang Tao. Okay. The way of heaven broadens human effort in social practice. Mencius maintained that we all have the inner spiritual resources to our self-awareness and broaden our networks of communal participation, biological and environmental constraints notwithstanding. We always have the freedom and the ability to refine and enlarge our heaven nobility, our great body. Now remember, I think I referenced this last time, there's no divine other superpower, anything else. It's all about being on this earth in this material body. So the way of heaven is all up to you. Okay? But it's not in isolation, because remember that Confucius, unlike postmodernity, Confucius has an emphasis on community. Okay? So what Confucius says is that, and Mencius picks up on, really drives home into the kind of Confucian paradigm that we know it kind of today, is that you leave behind heaven as you self-transform on your journey into saging. Okay, and you don't ever become a sage. You're always in the process of saging. Okay, so the way of heaven isn't, well, maybe Christians would think of it as in, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, or I'm going to believe in Jesus or whatever, so I can go somewhere later when I die. It is all relegated to the here and now of the material realm. Okay, this is why I think Confucianism actually is a great corrective to some Protestant interpretations of Christianity, because sometimes we can lose ourselves in the spiritual aspect. I'm justified. I'm good with God. I'm going to heaven. I don't have to worry about anything. But meanwhile, our brothers and sisters are dying of hunger and thirst. Or maybe they're dying because of their skin color or their orientation, right? Like, we can be so heavenly focused that we're of no earthly good. And I think Confucianism reminds us that this world does matter. This world does matter. Okay? I'm gonna roll on down. Let's see here. The life of Mencius. Let's kind of jump into what he was about. He was born in 371, before the current era, in Zhao, located in the present-day Shandong province. Okay? He lost his father at the age of 3 as well. He studied Confucianism from a young age because of his interests and beliefs in Ren and Li. These are 2 terms you're going to become very familiar with next time. But Ren and Li, okay, humaneness and praxis. And these 2 are not in opposition. They kind of function like this. They work together. Your humaneness is going to influence the way that you walk this world and leave the way of heaven in your wake. Okay, you're going to make yourself better. By making yourself better, you make other people better. And by making other people better, then the world starts to become better. Okay, that's a real simplistic way of defining a more complicated system, but it's going to work for now until we get into it. He later spread his teachings upon a town named Qi and eventually became an official for the state. Mencius became a Confucian evangelist. Confucius wasn't an evangelist. You know, there's only 3 evangelistic traditions, religiously speaking.
No.
3. You want to guess what they are? You know one. Christianity is one, emphasis on go and tell, right? What's the other one? Islam is also. Yep. What's the other one? One more. No, they have no. In fact, if you try to become Jewish, rabbis will say, why? That's your first question. Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
It's Christian. Buddhism is evangelistic. Yeah, you didn't see that coming, did you? No,
Uh-uh.
no. You can have militant Buddhist evangelists, okay? And in fact, I recently had to stop listening to a podcast because the guy and I love the fact that he was moving in this Buddhist direction. I love that exposure, but it became so heavy-handed that finally I was like, I don't listen to my own talk like this about the religion that I actually follow. So I'm out. Anyway, so he became a Confucian evangelist. Mencius added his own philosophy to the Ren, to the humaneness of Confucianism. Mencius made the original goodness of human nature the heading to his teaching, the original goodness. For some of us who are from the Christian tradition, we might think of ourselves as totally depraved or bad or sinful, and we need God's help to intervene that negative process and cycle, because a lot of our liturgies wrapped around this idea of that we're unworthy, we can't, come into your presence. And I would actually challenge that if you actually look at some of the biblical texts. But in general, we have a negative view where Confucius and Mencius, especially, the original goodness. Humans are actually good. From Mencius' strong belief in human nature, he became known as the second sage of Confucianism for furthering and modernizing the beliefs for his time, roughly a century after the death of Confucius. Okay, so he was sort of like the hip Confucian scholar. He was like, do you know who N.T. Wright is? Are you familiar with it? Kind of like the N.T., maybe better. I don't know. Sorry, I'm going to expose too much. I'm going to back away from that conversation. All right. I'm going to back away from the conversation. I like N.T. Wright in that he is one of the rare scholars that actually does believe in Jesus. He actually has a real relationship with Jesus. A lot of scholars in the Christian and religious world, biblical studies, very few actually will have a robust, zesty faith.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually very, very true. I'm in the minority because I do believe in Jesus, and I'm not afraid to talk about it, and I have hope in resurrection. Can't tell you it definitely happens, but I can tell you my hope is real. My hope is real. Okay, during his life, Mencius lived in what is known as the Warring States. His work and determination to preach Confucianism is widely regarded as modern philosophers as what saved Confucianism's core beliefs during this time of new and abstract philosophy. Okay, Mencius also played a big role in the government, considering he was an official for his state earlier in life. He advocated less taxation for the people and the sharing of resources and wealth. Again, like what, 22,000 years before Marx gets to it? Okay, our ideas are really completely out of the blue and totally unique. Okay, these things are always in the process of working themselves out. When Mencius was too old to travel and preach, he sat down and wrote a book of his findings and preaching throughout his life. It's titled Mencius. When my doctoral program asks me one more time what the title of my dissertation is, I'm just gonna go, it's Lauren. Okay, enabled the teachings of Confucianism to travel farther than he or his followers could travel. And Mencius later died in 289 before the current era as the widely regarded co-founder of Confucianism. So if you ever get into like more detailed studies, one of the things is you think Confucius and Mencius. That's kind of like the lingo, but it's like Confucius, Mencius. But because of his significance, he gets partnered with Confucius as if they were Martin Luther and Philip Melanchthon. Okay, like if you do you know who those are? Sorry, that's my world is the 1500s in Germany. Yeah, well, that's his like bestie, very anxious bestie. And his pastoral letters to Philip Melanchthon, who's off doing these conversations with other Catholics and other councils and diets and berms and all that fun stuff. Luther is regularly telling Melanchthon to chill out. Relax, my friend. Anyway, that is sort of Mencius and Confucius. So now we have our people. Now we know who we're talking about, okay? So with that, I want to open up for any other questions, and I want to give you a break. Any questions? Anything to add about Confucius or Mencius that you know that I don't? Yeah, I mentioned the different places. Oh, you mean like a map? I am horrible with my own geography, let alone world geography. So I can give you the names and then you can check it out later, or during the break I could see if I can find a map. Yeah, and that was the Shandong province is current, and there was it was named something else because they do change names. Shandong. Yeah. All right. Any other questions? Anything to add? Let's take a little break and stretch, get the blood flowing, and then we'll come back and look at the text. That is perfect timing. Yeah, perfect. Linda, I'm going to share my screen so you'll be able to see it.
Oh, good. You're okay.
That's not going to work. Thought it might be fun to see if I could find a good map. I'll have to try to see if I can do that for next time. I could print it out too. Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. My husband's a civil engineer, and he is like coordinates and north and south and northeast, northeast. You know, he'll say, so you're gonna go north on Route 6, and then you're gonna go south, and I'm like, yeah, yeah. I regularly go like, over in like Utah, and he's like, Utah. Like, you know what I mean. Did you get one of these? Yeah. Okay. Oh, I gotta. Does anyone need to borrow a copy of the Analects to like maybe take home and read on your own? Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is my favorite part. Text analysis. Yeah. Oh, wait, I think I gave you one. See, do you have, okay. All right. Sharon and Jay, when you're ready. Yeah, it's okay. I love it. I love the conversation. I love the conversation. All right, I'm gonna move this out of my way because I no longer need my outline because I'm not doing data or factual stuff. We're doing text, okay? So what I've done is I've selected interesting passages from the chapters that I've read of the Analects, okay? Unlike narrative, each of these numbered fragments can be taken out of quote unquote context in the sense that not always is everything in chapter 3 all identical and the same. Unlike the biblical text, like the stuff about Jesus, where we, for instance, on Sunday, I'm preaching on something that is often taken out of context, and you have to like read it within everything else. You can look at these as isolated, because remember, he taught in dialogue. These are like moments of conversation that were written down and grouped in terms of what might be the spirit of all of them together, but it's not necessarily a narrative. Okay, it's not necessarily a narrative. So one of the first quotes that we have here is, the master said. Off the bat, I need you to know that the master is always Confucius. In all of these dialogues, the master is Confucius. Okay, don't take it personally. It doesn't mean you're a slave. It's just he was Master Kung Fu Tzu is the name, the teaching name, right? Okay, so here we go. First quote. The master said, if someone is not humane in spite of being a man, what has he to do with ritual? If someone is not humane in spite of being a man, what has he to do with music? Confucius says. What does that mean? What do you think it means? This is a time for, we're all in the same boat. What do you guys think? You can see it up there too. What do you mean by that? Say more. Jay, we're on this one. Interesting. I like that. I think that you're right. I think that there is an aspect of community that's involved with those things, absolutely. Especially in his day and age, because what did Confucius not have that we probably all take for granted nowadays when it comes to listening to music? Pop it in, turn it on. I don't need anyone to necessarily play it for me, but when you're looking at 500 before the Common Era and you wanted to hear some music, either you're playing it yourself or you're going to listen to someone. Absolutely, community is involved in this, sure. What else? What else is going on here? The master said, if someone is not humane, again, this is that Ren, this is that very humaneness is crucial to Confucianism. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. What else? Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, because communities form culture, and culture kind of informs communities, right? Yeah. Yeah, like, yeah, the listening of music sort of renders the person humane, right? Is that what you're, okay, yeah, yeah, there is that trajectory that music hits us. What else? Anything else? Yes. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, growth is absolutely crucial. Can I pose a question? What happens when you put ritual in the hands of an inhumane person? Right? Yep. Right. Right. Humaneness is that key ingredient that takes something that can go this way or that way. Humaneness will define that all day long. Okay? All day long. All day long. The tricky part is that second part with music, but one of the things that Confucius will say later is um, the barbarians don't have music. Yeah. Yeah. If someone is not humane in spite of being a man, what has he to do with music? In other words, he can't. If you don't have humaneness, you're not going to be able to enjoy music. Yes. Yes. Yes, I love that. I love that. When you said that, Julie, something popped inside of me that said, if you put music in the hands of the inhumane person, they'll use it as an object for themselves. But there are moments when you put music in the hands of the humane person, they will admire it as this art, this heart song, right? It's a whole different relationship. So it's not that an inhumane person, I need to make sure I say that because we're not saying inhuman, we're saying inhumane person. When the inhumane person listens to music, it's a taking and coveting, like inside, rather than an appreciation of something that exists outside of you. You need a certain amount of humaneness to allow someone else, something else, whatever it is, to exist in its own right without taking it and making it your own and using it for your own benefit. Anything else about number 3? Pretty insightful, huh? Yeah. On cults. Good. Let me know if we are one. Yeah. He did. Yes. 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 I think that's the distinction. That's excellent. Good example. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Though I might see that as a form of resistance against the status quo. Yeah, yeah, fair enough. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Humaneness. Yeah, 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 fair enough. That's excellent. That's a good example. Yeah, yeah. Confucius says, if you want to actually appreciate ritual and music, be a little humane. Be a little humane. Okay. Moving on to 4. You guys ready? Okay.
Yes.
Lin Fang asked about the root of ritual. The master said, an important question indeed. In ritual, it is better to be frugal rather than lavish, but in mourning, it is better to be sorrowful rather than unmoved. Confucius says. What's going on there? To an extent, on one part is minimal, right? Yep. Lin Fang asked about the root of ritual. The master said, an important question indeed. In ritual, it is better to be frugal rather than lavish, but in mourning, it is better to be sorrowful rather than unmoved. Why the coupling of those two ideas? Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah, there's a connection between the ritual and the mourning, and Julie's absolutely right. Like you don't want to come in strong with the big show of ritual. It is better to be low key with the big show, but when it comes to mourning, it's better to show sorrow than nothing. What do we do when we're having strong, maybe sad feelings? This church, we recently had a funeral, right? Express it. Or fear of show. Confucius is saying, no, dummy, that's the right time. Not processing in with a bunch of stuff and making ritual the big thing and repressing that humaneness of other people or even yourself. He's saying, downplay that, let the humanity show. And by the way, when you're over here, don't do the ritual thing of stoicism or whatever it is, but show in both instances, humaneness actually rises to the top. Mm-hmm. Yes, yes, yes. Well said. Vulnerability, I do think, is at play here. Absolutely. Yeah. You guys see that? There's something vulnerable about being humble in your approach to ritual. Right? There's a vulnerability in that humility. Yes. Right? Yeah. Yes. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. I love that. Yeah. I think I didn't see the vulnerability before, but I love that you brought that up. Thank you. Anything else to add? How does something like in ritual is better to be frugal rather than lavish, how does that apply to us today? What do we like to do? in our little postmodern context. I know. I am fighting the urge not to buy candy corn because I refuse to buy candy corn before October 1st. Candy corn is allowed 1 month a year. Then it goes away on November 1st, okay? No, they got that stuff out now in August. When does Christmas show up? November 1st. Thanksgiving barely gets a chance, right? We have these big, huge shows of ritual. Okay. Why? Okay. That was my existential crisis for the day, no, for the evening. There's probably another one later tonight. Mhm. Yeah. 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 Not necessarily ritual, but correlated with lavishness is the way that we like to wear our wealth out in public. Cars, houses, clothes, technology, and some of us can't afford a lot of that stuff. So we put on this big ritual exposure of all of our lavishness. It is difficult to walk this world as a one-car family of 5. There were quite a few looks that I have received. Well, we now have a car because someone gave us a car and Quinn is about to drive. But still, like making choices, like using cloth diapers. I mean, everyone looked at me like, don't you know it's like the 2000s now and you can buy them at the store? I was like, yeah, but I want to do something that's a little better for the environment. I don't know, I'm weird. But choosing a path that's diminished is harder to do in a society that celebrates the lavishness, right? One of the characteristic definitions of millennials, I love them. I'm right real close to them in age, like I'm breathing down their neck. Anyway, the millennials is the overabundance of looking like you have been working on Wall Street for the past 20 years at 25. Okay, this idea of this image that we have to present into the world, it is very tempting to do because it's kind of demanded, right? It's kind of demanded of us. Why do we have to look like we have it all together? That's the question I hear. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah, and then we turn around, we take all of those beautiful, wonderful, fleshy emotions and just jam them down in that garbage can on the inside. Stuff that right back on top. And we pay our therapists lots of money. Right? Confucius is asking us to recalibrate where we're showing stuff. Show it in the real human things, not the things we have put humanity into, but the actual things that come from the core of who we are. Core of who we are. It's okay to cry. Okay, it's okay to cry. The master said, barbarian peoples, oh look, it was the exact same chapter. Barbarian peoples with rulers are not as good as the various Chinese states without them. Oh, there's a lot of problems with this saying from the ears of 2022, right? Let's allow Confucius to exist in 500 before the Common Era. What is he saying? What is he trying to communicate? Domination. Genghis Khan was Mongolian? Yeah. Is that whom Confucius would be? When was Genghis Khan? Okay, so he's talking about some other set of barbarian peoples. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Barbarian peoples with rulers are not as good as the various Chinese states without them. What's the controlling thing there? What would the Chinese have that the quote unquote barbarian peoples don't have, according to Confucius? Music. Just kidding. I'm sure human beings have been making music since human beings can make music. That's pretty much forever. So it's not the rulers that make good states, it's the bottom. It's not top down, it's bottom up for Confucius. It's not a heavy-handed despot that like decides to control you. It's bottom up, it's from the community, it's the people controlling themselves and working towards each other in this Ren-Li and this humaneness and human-oriented praxis in the world. Okay. Yeah, I'm biased. One of my dear friends is Ukrainian. Yeah, we actually on Sunday, we pray for her. She's one of the 2 Ukrainian people that we pray for who have family back in the Ukraine. Yeah, it's not structure, order isn't a top-down phenomenon for Confucius. It's bottom up, and that's what he's saying. The Chinese people will be fine if you strip them of all their rulers because they have a culture, they have a community, they have a humaneness. Okay, and I think that's the distinction he's trying to make, as crass as it sounds to us today, because most likely the people he's referencing had their own systems and cultures and music and art and all that stuff. But as we do as human beings, we vilify anything not us, right? And Confucius isn't necessarily exempt from that tendency, okay? So, but what he's saying still holds true in terms of it's not the ruler that makes the people, it's the people that make the people, okay? So, I think immediately that I'm all for voting. I think it's a great thing to do. I know a lot of women suffered greatly to make sure I have a right to vote, right? So I take it very seriously. Simultaneously, I do not invest everything I have in that button because it's never going to come top down. We want change, folks. It's going to come from the bottom up. Okay? We change it. We put a lot of hope. Well, I voted for the right person. Now I can go back to bed, do my duty. We really want change. It's not going to be only. I do think it's important to vote, to access that language, but we also need to take responsibility to do something. Any questions or other insights about number 5? Yeah.
I don't know who the barbarian people are, but I wonder, I see in that statement against authoritarian.
Yeah.
Where people leave because no leader is a leader without at least half the people support them.
Yes. Yeah. What's so insightful about what you just said, Jay, is that for Confucians, rulers don't just get to be rulers because they stepped in and they decided to become the ruler. They earn it. They earn it through gaining the respect of the people. When the people pull their respect in Confucianism, the leader is no longer a leader. We have different relationship. We have a different relationship with our authority structures. Once a priest, always a priest. Always refer to me as reverend, right? No matter what I do, I try to lead a little bit differently than that. But yeah, I do, yeah, I think authoritarian. I think the barbarian is code for inhumane. He's gonna lump everyone into barbarian who doesn't have the humaneness, okay? Anything else about 5 before we move on to 12? Yeah. Hmm. Right. Confucius says. Could we move on to 12? You guys ready? Thank you. Thank you for adding that, Tim. Sacrifice as if present means sacrifice to the spirits as if the spirits were in one's presence. But the master said, if I myself do not take part in a sacrifice, it is as if no sacrifice is made. It says. What's going on there? You gotta be there. You gotta be present. Sacrifice isn't gonna sacrifice itself. No goat is gonna sacrifice itself, right? Goat's like, I'm out. There's no sacrificer. I'm out. See you later. Go hit that hayfield. Sacrifice as if present means sacrifice to the spirits as if the spirits were in one's presence. But the master said, if I myself do not take part in a sacrifice, it is as if no sacrifice is made. Those two-letter words are causing me a lot of difficulty tonight. So immediately you know that there's two statements being made that are in opposition. What is telling me that? What word tells me there's a contrast? The buts. And you thought all those grammar classes in elementary school about sentence diagramming weren't going to come back and haunt you. Welcome to studying the analects. Okay. What's the distinction that the master, what is Confucius, what's that distinction that he's trying to articulate to the statement that comes in? Probably from one of his students.
No idea.
Oh, it's 7:36. This will be our last one. Let me ask you a question that's related more to your context. Do you mind if I jump in and do that? Okay. When you gather on Sunday in your various establishments of worship, okay? When we worship, when we participate in that ritual, do we do it and imagine that the spirits are alongside us, or do we do it and put ourselves into it so that the worship actually means something? Who matters in this equation? Are we doing it to please God? As if God is present? Well, I do believe God is present everywhere. But are we doing it because we somehow need to appease God? So we should perform it perfectly? Or are we supposed to be in it so that it actually means something? Yeah. But in it. Because you're still there in the first one too. Yeah. Yeah, that's the distinction. So what I think John is highlighting on is this idea of not just present, I, who's here, I am. It's actually in it, take part in it. If I myself am not invested in this, if I'm just going through the ritual of reciting the Lord's Prayer, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. What about Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Entering into it, making those words come from somewhere. It's why I told my students, and in fact, you hear me say it, if you feel so called to say it with me, I say those words intentionally. Don't want you just regurgitating the words because you feel like you should. Say the creed because it means something to you. Say the Lord's Prayer because it means something to you. It's not, don't do it because you think God needs to hear it. That prayer is not for God. That prayer is solely for you. That sacrifice needs you to be in it. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, fair. Mhm. Yeah, so sacrifice can be something that's not strictly, yeah. Replace it with worship. Okay, worship as if present means worship to the spirits as if the spirits were in one's presence. So I'm worshiping in the idea that the spirits are around me and watching me and holding me to account or whatever. Like I'm going to worship the spirits as if the spirits were present. So it's all about the spirits, okay? But the master said, if I myself do not take part in the worship, it's as if no worship was done. Does that make, okay. I have to be in my words. I have to be in my words. I take my job on Sunday very, very seriously. I literally show up for that full 60 minutes. Every single one of those minutes, I am in. I do not dial it in. I refuse to. You need me to tell this story. You need me to be in the words. That's the way it's communicated. Okay, it's why when I crash after church, okay, because if we're not all in it, especially the leader, if the leader is not in it, and the leader is just regurgitating, going through the motions, people will start to go through the motions too. It starts to lose its luster. It starts to lose its magic. It starts to lose its energy, okay? So every minute I'm in it to win it. Just kidding. I'm not trying to win anything. I just couldn't stop myself, and it's getting late. But does that make sense if we change the word to worship? Yeah, yeah. And yeah. Any questions about the text that we just looked at, or feel free, I won't go through the rest of the text, so feel free to meditate on those. If you need a book to borrow because you'd like to read other places within the Analects, please let me know. We will want them back, but I would love for you to enjoy them for sure. And we will meet again next Thursday. We'll do some more lecture, and then we'll jump back into text analysis and see what Confucius can say to us and send us off with a good word. Any questions? What? Well, every first Sunday of the month we bless animals. I actually was like, I'm not doing a special St. Francis service because we're doing one this Sunday. Because we have such a great discipline of blessing the animals every month. So yeah, so if you do miss yours or whatever, you can come to ours at 5 p.m. on Sunday, animal blessing. Please do, please do. I do not bring Angie because she's a freak. She will eat all the dogs. All right, Linda, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Thanks for joining us.
Good night.
Night. Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes. Ah,
I will not be here the next 2 weeks. So it's just a mediation.
okay, all right. Well, they're recorded. So, and in fact, I need to go ahead and, yes, the link for this, we just use our normal Sunday. So, and it was so great. Sharon, great to see you. Thank you so much for coming.